My name is Clara Evans, and I am 36 years old. I live in a tidy, quiet house in a subdivision in Sandy, Utah, where the Wasatch Mountains watch over everything like silent, stone-faced guardians. For the last several years, I've felt like I was playing a part. My husband, Richard, passed away last week. He was older than me, a man in his late 40s who had already built a life before I entered it, and sometimes it felt like I was just a guest. We were polite, we were functional, but the space between us had grown into a vast, silent canyon long before his heart finally gave out. People in the neighborhood knew us enough to offer a friendly wave, but we were private people. Richard preferred it that way. I used to think I did too, until the silence he left behind became a physical weight, pressing down on me until I couldn't breathe. Next door, in a modest brick rambler identical to my own, lives Leo Vance. He's a few years younger than me, maybe 32 or 33. He's the kind of man you notice for his quietness. I've seen him tending to his yard or bringing in groceries, and we've shared countless brief, polite greetings over the fence that separates our properties. He has kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that always seem to stand in stark contrast to Richard's constant, hurried energy. I never really knew him, not in any meaningful way. He was just the quiet man next door. Richard's death was sudden, a heart attack. The news spread through the neighborhood like a tremor. I moved through the next few days in a fog of condolences and casseroles. I held the funeral, accepted the hugs, and listened to people tell me what a great man Richard was. I didn't go. I couldn't bring myself to correct them. The day after the burial, I was standing in my own living room, and the silence was so complete, so absolute, it was louder than a scream. I felt the walls closing in. I thought I could handle it, that I was strong enough. But the loneliness was a sharp, physical pain. I had to get out. I had to be near another living, breathing person, if only for a moment. My eyes landed on Leo's house next door. Without letting myself think too much, I walked out my front door, across the small patch of lawn, and knocked on his. It was mid-afternoon, and I had no idea if he was even home. I was wearing a shapeless black coat over days-old clothes. My hair was a mess, and my eyes felt raw and swollen. In my hand, I clutched a lukewarm mug of tea, as if it were some kind of offering or shield. When the door opened, he was there, dressed in a simple hoodie and comfortable-looking sweatpants, his expression shifting from surprise to a gentle concern. "Hi, Leo," I heard myself say, my voice sounding thin and foreign. "I'm sorry to bother you. Do you mind if I come in for a minute?" He didn't hesitate for a second. He just stepped aside and let me in. I was immediately struck by the warmth of his small house. He offered me a spot on his sofa and took my mug to refill it with fresh, hot tea. He didn't pepper me with questions or offer empty platitudes. He just sat in a chair across from me, creating a space for me to just exist. I held the new cup, watching the steam curl into the air, my hands wrapped tightly around the ceramic as if it were the only thing grounding me. After what felt like an eternity of quiet, the words finally came out, a ragged whisper. "It's just too quiet over there." My gaze drifted toward the window that faced my own home. I thought I would be okay, but I really don't want to be by myself right now. He simply nodded, his expression full of a quiet understanding. He told me I didn't owe him any explanation. We sat like that for a while longer, sipping our tea, letting the comfortable silence settle between us. It wasn't an awkward void. It felt like a sanctuary. Eventually, I started talking. The words spilled out of me, a slow, steady confession I hadn't even realized I was holding in. I spoke about Richard, about the good years, and then about the slow, imperceptible drift that had pulled us apart. I talked about how, in the end, it felt less like a marriage and more like an arrangement between two roommates who shared a mortgage. I wasn't weeping hysterically. It was a calm, detached recitation of facts, a truth that had been buried for so long it felt strange to give it air. I finally met his eyes and said, "I know this must sound terrible, but a part of me feels like I've already done my grieving. It feels like I lost the man I married years ago, long before his heart stopped." I expected a flicker of judgment, of shock, but his expression never changed. He just listened, his quiet attention a balm on a wound I didn't know was so raw. That was all I needed, not advice, not pity, just a witness. Before I left, I took in his living room again, the worn armchair, the stack of books on the coffee table, the soft lamplight. "It feels warm in here," I said, a faint smile touching my lips for the first time in days. And then I was gone, stepping back out into the cold and returning to the hollow shell of my house. But the brief connection had changed something. The invisible barrier between our two homes and our two lives had dissolved. The morning after that first visit, I woke up to the same crushing silence, but this time, it was different. A new thought had taken root in my mind: him. The image of Leo sitting across from me, his calm presence a steady anchor in my storm, kept replaying in my head. I thought about the raw, honest things I had told him, a stranger, and how he had accepted them without flinching. His quiet empathy had gotten under my skin, not in an invasive way, but like a gentle warmth seeping into a space that had been cold for far too long. I tried to be productive. There were calls to make, thank you notes to write, a mountain of logistics to sort through. But I just stared at a list on the kitchen counter, my mind completely blank. By noon, the hollow feeling in my stomach reminded me I hadn't eaten. The thought of preparing food for one, of sitting alone at my own dining table, was unbearable. Then an idea surfaced. I wondered if he had eaten. It was a flimsy excuse, I knew, but it was enough. I drove to Charlie's Deli, a little sandwich shop a few streets over, and bought 2 turkey and Swiss sandwiches. When I knocked on his door for the second time in days, holding 2 brown paper bags, I felt a tremor of uncertainty. What was I doing? He opened the door, and the surprise on his face was quickly replaced by a soft smile. I figured you might have forgotten about lunch, I said, trying to sound more casual than I felt. I almost did too. I brought you something, if you don't mind. I didn't wait for his answer, just walked past him into the house as if it were the most natural thing in the world. To my surprise, it felt natural. It felt right. We ended up on his small back patio. The sky was a uniform, heavy gray threatening rain, but the air was crisp and cool. I handed him one of the sandwiches, and we sat in comfortable silence, unwrapping the crinkling paper. We didn't speak for the first few minutes, and I was grateful he didn't try to fill the silence. I took small, mechanical bites of my sandwich, my gaze fixed on the line of tall aspens behind his fence, their leaves trembling in the slight breeze. I felt lost in my own thoughts, sorting through years of layered emotions. It's so strange, I said finally, my voice low and soft. I thought I would feel more shattered. I expected to wake up every morning sobbing, or screaming, or something dramatic. But mostly, I just feel empty. It's like I'm a ghost walking through a life that doesn't belong to me anymore. He glanced over at me, but I couldn't bring myself to meet his eyes. I kept them trained on the trees, as if they held some answer. I've been carrying this knot in my chest for so long, Leo. It was there long before Richard died. I think the real grief happened years ago, when we stopped connecting, when we stopped being partners and just became 2 people sharing a space. I let out a long, slow breath, not realizing I'd been holding it. He didn't interrupt. He just let me speak, his quiet presence an invitation to continue. We were so close in the beginning. I loved him. I truly did. But his work became his life. The travel increased. He came home later and later, and when he was home, he was somewhere else. I started eating my dinners alone, even on nights he was sitting in the very next room. We shared a bed, but there were miles between us. I finally turned to look at him, my eyes feeling glassy but my gaze steady. Have you ever felt like you were slowly becoming invisible in your own life? He gave a small, slow nod, not because he'd lived my exact experience, but because he understood the universal ache of loneliness. There was a brief pause, and then a small, self-conscious laugh escaped me. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to unload all of this on you. It's just, I don't have anyone else to talk to about it. You don't have to apologize for anything, Clara, he said, his voice gentle. Sometimes all you need is someone to sit with you. His words were so simple, so direct, and they landed with profound relief. I gave him a grateful, slightly surprised look. For the next hour, the conversation shifted. We didn't talk about Richard or grief anymore. We talked about small, simple things. He told me about his job as an accountant. I talked about my old dream of opening a small flower shop. We discovered a shared love for old movies and the same little coffee shop downtown. I told him about a stray cat I once tried to adopt, who repaid my kindness by running away after a week. He told me an embarrassing story about accidentally sending a work email with a typo in the subject line that read pubic announcement instead of public announcement. I laughed, a real, deep laugh that felt rusty and unfamiliar in my own chest. For that one moment, I felt a flicker of the person I used to be, a person who still had joy left inside her. At one point, as we sat at the small patio table, the back of my hand brushed against his. It was an accident, but it lingered for a second longer than it should have, a tiny spark of warmth that we both noticed. I pulled my hand back gently, a wave of complicated emotions washing over me: confusion, guilt, and something else I couldn't name. I should probably go, I said suddenly, the mood shifting. I stood up, feeling flustered. This is all probably too soon. I don't want you to think I'm just using you as some kind of emotional crutch. He stood up as well. You're not, he said, his voice firm and reassuring. I paused at his back door. I just really didn't want to be alone today. He nodded. Then don't be. Anytime you need to talk, or just not talk, my door is open. The silence that hung between us was heavy with unspoken things. Neither of us dared to name what was happening, but we both felt it. A connection had formed, a quiet warmth that had taken us both by surprise. I gave him a slow nod. Thank you, Leo. I mean it. Then I stepped outside and walked across the damp grass back to my own house. I wrapped my arms around myself as I went, a cool breeze catching my hair. Something had undeniably shifted between us. No lines had been physically crossed, but an invisible threshold had been breached. A fragile, unspoken beginning had taken root, and I had a feeling it wasn't going to go away. The next day began under a heavy, overcast sky, the air thick with the promise of rain. I sat at my own kitchen table, a half-empty cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. I was supposed to be sorting through paperwork, but my focus was gone. My thoughts kept circling back to Leo, to the feeling of being in his presence. It wasn't just that he had been kind. It was the profound sense of being seen and heard. His quiet company had stayed with me, a comforting warmth against the chill of my empty house. I couldn't shake the memory of his words, or the way he'd looked at me, not with pity, but with a simple, human empathy. And then there was that fleeting touch on the patio, a small moment that had imprinted itself on my mind. Sometime after lunch, I found myself drawn to the window overlooking our adjacent backyards. I told myself I was just looking at the weather, but I was looking for him. And there he was. He was standing near the edge of his porch, his arms crossed over his chest, staring out at nothing in particular. He looked so steady, so solid. I watched him for a few minutes, then turned away from the window and began to pace my living room. 10 minutes stretched into 15. I was trapped in a cycle of indecision, a battle between not wanting to impose and not being able to bear another minute alone in that house. Finally, the need for human connection won. I walked back over and knocked. I knew he'd be the one to answer, but my heart still gave a little jump when the door opened. I stood there in a navy blue sweater and black leggings, feeling exposed and weary. I hadn't bothered with makeup. My hair was simply pulled back. I was just me. He looked tired too, but his eyes held a quiet intensity, as if he'd been doing some hard thinking of his own. Can I come in? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Yeah, he said immediately, stepping back without a flicker of hesitation. I walked past him into the familiar living room, but my steps were slower this time, more tentative. I felt a deep uncertainty about what I was doing, about what I was asking of him. I didn't rush to speak. I just stood there for a moment, my eyes scanning the room as if it might offer some clue about what to do next. I didn't plan on coming over, I finally said, my voice shaky. I've been arguing with myself for the last hour, but there was nowhere else I wanted to go. You don't ever need a reason, he said softly. I moved to the couch and curled up on one end, pulling my knees to my chest, a subconscious effort to make myself smaller, less of a burden. He sat in the armchair opposite me, maintaining a respectful distance. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the steady ticking of a clock on his wall. I don't know how to be alone, I confessed, the admission breaking the quiet. I went straight from my parents' house to living with Richard. I've never truly been on my own. There was always someone else there. Now, there's just me. He nodded slowly. That's a hard adjustment for anyone. I let out a shaky breath. The thing is, I've felt alone for years, even when he was still here. It's like I was already mourning the end of our marriage long before he was actually gone. The words were heavy, each one costing me something to say. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his focus entirely on me. That kind of loneliness is its own kind of brutal, he said. When someone is physically present but emotionally a million miles away. I looked at him then, really looked at him. My voice dropped even lower. Do you think it's wrong that I don't feel guilty for being here? For talking to you like this? It's so soon. He didn't answer right away, and I appreciated that he was taking my question seriously. No, he said finally, his voice steady. I don't think there's a timeline for grief or for connection. Sometimes people show up in our lives right when we need them. That doesn't make it wrong. His words felt like a pardon. My eyes softened, and I realized I had been holding my breath, waiting for his judgment. I just didn't expect to feel drawn to anyone right now, I whispered, the admission hanging in the air. Neither did I, he answered honestly. I looked down at my hands, nervously fiddling with the hem of my sweater. I can't go back to that house tonight, not because I'm trying to run away from it, but because I feel like I'll suffocate if I have to sit within those walls again. I knew he could see the truth of it in my eyes. This wasn't melodrama. It was the raw desperation of a woman who had reached her limit. You don't have to explain anything, he said quietly. If you need a place to just breathe, I can make up the guest room for you. I blinked rapidly, fighting back a sudden surge of tears. I didn't expect you to offer that. You're not alone in this, Clara. I nodded slowly, and for the first time all day, a fragile smile found its way to my lips. Later that evening, he pulled clean linens from a hall closet and prepared the spare room while I sat in the living room, cradling a mug of chamomile tea he'd made for me. We didn't say much. The silence between us had become its own language, comfortable and reassuring. Before I went to bed, I felt I needed to thank him again. I found him in the quiet kitchen. There was no tension, no awkwardness, just a quiet sense of closeness. Thank you, Leo, I said softly, for all of this. For not asking too many questions, for making me feel like a person again. And then, on impulse, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a profoundly human one. It was about gratitude and a desperate need for comfort. My head rested against his shoulder, and I felt his arms come around me, holding me in a steady, calming embrace. It was the kind of hug that says, I'm here, you're safe. It was the kind of hug I would never forget. When we finally pulled apart, I whispered, good night, then I turned and disappeared down the hall to the guest room. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, the warmth of his embrace still lingering on my skin. For the first time in a very long time, I realized my world hadn't ended. It had just changed. I didn't sleep deeply that night, but it wasn't a restless, anxious wakefulness. It was a heightened awareness. I was aware of the quiet house around me, aware of Leo sleeping in the room down the hall, aware of the immense weight of the situation. I was a widow who had just buried her husband, and I was choosing to spend the night in the home of a man I barely knew, a man who was showing me more kindness than I had felt in years. The walls felt thin, every creak of the house seemed amplified, and my thoughts spun in a slow, contemplative orbit. I kept replaying the hug in the hallway. It was so simple, so honest. It wasn't about desire. It was about need, a fundamental human need for connection that I had starved for so long. It was a hug you don't forget, not for what it might lead to, but for what it was in that moment, a lifeline. When the first pale light of dawn began to seep through the blinds, I quietly got out of bed. The house was still and silent. I moved with care, not wanting to disturb him. I found my way to the kitchen and started a pot of coffee, the aroma slowly filling the quiet space. I stood by the window, wrapping my hands around a warm mug, and watched the morning light spill over the fence that separated our yards, our lives. About 20 minutes later, I heard the soft padding of his footsteps. He appeared in the doorway, looking rumpled from sleep. He was wearing a plain t-shirt and pajama pants, his hair slightly messy. He looked real, approachable, and still so kind. Morning, I said quietly. Hey, he replied with a small, sleepy smile. I made coffee. He nodded and came into the kitchen, accepting the mug I offered him. We stood there for a few moments in that easy silence, just sipping our coffee as the world outside woke up. It wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Eventually, I sat down at his small kitchen table. I hadn't brought a robe, so I just pulled the guest room's light gray blanket more tightly around my shoulders. After staring out the window for a long moment, I finally voiced the thought that had been circling in my head. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I said it to the window, to the morning, to myself. He sat down in the chair across from me. I don't think you're supposed to have any idea, Clara. You're just figuring things out 1 minute at a time. That's more than enough. I nodded slowly, absorbing his words. I keep thinking about how it felt to be here yesterday. Just sitting here, talking, breathing. It felt like I reclaimed a tiny piece of myself that I thought was gone forever. I met his gaze directly then. There was no romance in my eyes, no confusion, just a deep, searching honesty. Richard and I, we weren't a team anymore. We shared a life on paper, but in reality, we were two strangers coexisting. I didn't even realize how hollow I had become until I stepped out of that house. He just listened, his attention unwavering. I knew he could tell I needed to say it all out loud, to give voice to the truth I had carried silently for so long. I came here yesterday because I couldn't stand the silence. I continued, and now I don't want to go back. Not yet. And so, I stayed. The day unfolded without any plan. I just existed in his space, and he let me. He made us scrambled eggs and toast for breakfast. I helped him sort a basket of laundry, and we both laughed when I held up a single, bright pink sock that had mysteriously infiltrated his whites. In the afternoon, we went for a slow, meandering walk through the neighborhood. We didn't hold hands, but our shoulders brushed occasionally, and neither of us pulled away. The day passed with a gentle, healing rhythm. That evening, he cooked a simple dinner of pasta with a fresh salad. Afterward, we found ourselves on the couch, a nature documentary playing quietly on the television. I had my legs tucked underneath me, holding a warm cup of tea. He sat beside me, a comfortable distance between us. It's strange, I said into the quiet room. I feel a sense of peace here, like I'm allowed to just be myself. I haven't felt that in such a long time. I turned to look at him. You don't have to rush this. There's no playbook for what you're going through. He looked up at me then, his eyes searching mine for something, maybe permission, maybe clarity. Do you think it's wrong that I don't feel bad about this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. No, he said gently. I think you're finally doing what you need to do. There is nothing wrong with that. My head found its way to his shoulder, a simple, trusting gesture. I felt him rest it there, and then his arm came around me, not in a possessive or suggestive way, but as a steady, supportive presence. In that quiet moment, something shifted in the air between us. I lifted my head to look at him, and our faces were closer than they had ever been. I saw something in his eyes, a reflection of the same confusing, burgeoning emotion I was feeling. I could feel the warmth of his breath. Slowly, tentatively, I leaned in. Our lips met in a kiss that was incredibly soft and careful, more like a question than a statement. It wasn't a kiss of passion or fire. It was a kiss of connection, of two lonely souls finding a moment of solace. I pulled back after a moment, a fresh wave of uncertainty washing over me. I'm sorry, I whispered. Don't be, he replied, his voice just as quiet. We didn't kiss again that night. I leaned my head against his chest this time, and he held me. We stayed like that for what felt like an hour, in the quiet stillness, while the television murmured on. Something had irrevocably changed, but neither of us was ready to name it. I don't think I truly understood the depth of the bond forming between us until much later. In those early days, we were just two people, navigating the strange, unexpected circumstances life had thrown at us. But as the days turned into weeks, the simplicity of our shared time, the morning coffees, the quiet walks, the easy silences began to feel less like a temporary comfort and more like the foundation of something real. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic transformation. It was a gradual unfolding that began after that quiet night and that one gentle, hesitant kiss. We didn't rush headlong into a relationship. In fact, for a while after that night, we retreated slightly into our own spaces, as if we both intuitively knew we needed time to process the shift. But it was a comfortable distance, not an awkward one. We were two people moving at a pace dictated by caution and healing. For the next few days, I stayed in my own house. I explained to him that I couldn't abandon it, that I needed to face the memories, sort through the life Richard and I had built, and decide what to do with it. He understood completely, but a new ritual formed between us. Every morning, I would walk over to his house for coffee, or he would bring 2 cups over to mine. We would sit and talk, sometimes about the heavy things, but more often about the small, everyday stuff. The grief was still a part of me, a constant, low hum beneath the surface, but a quiet companionship was growing between us, one that didn't demand grand declarations or intense confessions. I would watch him make coffee, and we would sit on his comfortable sofa, sharing our thoughts as the morning sun streamed through the window. There were days I cried, and he would just sit with me until the tears passed. And there were days I laughed, a genuine, unburdened laugh, usually at something silly he did, like the time he tried to fix a wobbly leg on my kitchen table and ended up making it worse. I found myself smiling more than I had in years. His steady, gentle presence was slowly coaxing me back to life. I could see the change in myself, and I could see I was changing him too. A quiet man who lived a solitary life now had someone to share his mornings with. His own smile seemed to come more easily. The sorrow in my eyes began to be replaced by something else, a flicker of hope. I started talking about things I had forgotten I loved, like gardening and painting. I was rediscovering the person I was before my marriage had slowly faded to gray. It was not a fast or easy process, but with every day we spent together, I could feel myself healing. Grief, I was learning, doesn't disappear, but you can learn to carry it. As time passed, I realized that I wasn't just learning to live with grief. I was learning to live again. Then, one sunny Saturday about a month later, I invited him to my house for dinner. He hadn't been inside since those first few tumultuous days, and I felt a knot of nerves tighten in my stomach as I prepared. This house was where it all began, the place steeped in loss and memory, the place my late husband had once called home. But asking him here felt different this time. It felt like a deliberate step forward. He arrived with a bottle of wine, and I had cooked a simple pasta dish, something light and comforting. We decided to eat on my back patio as the sun began its slow descent behind the mountains. The evening air was cool and pleasant, the kind of night that invites you to linger and enjoy the quiet stillness. We didn't need to fill the air with constant chatter during dinner. The conversation flowed easily, comfortably, as if we had been sharing meals like this for years. There were no expectations, just the soft clinking of our forks, the distant hum of the city, and the easy smiles we exchanged across the small table. As night fell completely, the soft glow from the patio lights created an intimate space around us. It was then that I looked at him, and the look in my eyes was different than it had been before. It wasn't clouded by sadness or uncertainty anymore. It was clear and steady. "I think I'm ready," I said, my voice soft but sure. "Ready for what?" he asked, his expression open and questioning. "Ready to let myself actually move forward. I've been so stuck, Leo, and I didn't know how to get out. But when I'm with you, I feel like it's possible. Not because you're fixing me, but because you helped me see that it's okay to want a new beginning, that my future doesn't have to be defined by my past." His expression softened as he listened. I saw the weight of my words land on him. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he simply reached across the table and took my hand in his. The warmth of his touch was solid, real. It felt right. I knew he understood. I saw it in his eyes. I smiled then, a genuine, wide smile that reached my eyes, and I realized how far I had come. This was no longer just about me recovering from a loss. It was about us finding something new, something unexpected and beautiful. "I don't want to rush into anything," I continued, squeezing his hand gently, "but when I imagine what my future could look like, you're in it. And that feels important." It was his turn to smile, a touch of nervous relief in his expression. "I don't need to rush either," he said softly. "We can take all the time we need. But I want to be there with you, Clara. I think we both deserve a chance at this." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of mutual understanding. There were no more questions to ask, just a shared certainty that whatever was next for us, we would face it together. From that night on, everything was different, yet everything was the same. We didn't fall into a whirlwind romance. Our connection was too quiet and deep for that. We continued to take our time, cherishing the simple companionship we had built. The quiet mornings, the long evening talks, helping each other with small chores around our houses, these were the things that defined us. We leaned on each other, a slow and steady progression into something more. Months later, I found myself waking up in his house more often than my own. Eventually, I just stayed. The love we built wasn't the loud, chaotic kind from books and movies. It was steady and true, forged in vulnerability and kindness. It was built not on grand gestures, but on the thousands of small, shared moments and the unwavering support we offered each other. I was happy, truly happy. And so was he. And I knew this was the right kind of new beginning, one where we had both found a way to move forward, not by forgetting the past, but by refusing to let it define our future. Our story was no longer just about grief. It was about healing. It was about the quiet, unexpected grace of a second chance.